Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, happy to be here.
I think we've had a lot of PT sessions together where we've essentially had our own private podcast. So I just figured it would be cool to actually, have you on here. And we actually talk about a lot of this stuff, I think, just in passing and not even realizing it, while you're needling me or, making me do like flexibility exercises that I'm not good at.
Come on.
But yeah, originally you joined the gym as a client and as a member, right? That
Yeah.
was how the whole thing started. How long ago was that, rough?
So I looked back. I started here in January of 2021. So this was my first powerlifting gym I ever trained out of. It was strictly just commercial gyms, like Anytime Fitnesses before that.
Okay.
And it was really just, obviously COVID happened. Lots of gyms shut down for a while. I wasn't really
Yeah.
comfy going to a gym for a bit. So just once I was really ready and comfy to start coming back in, I was like, time to find a powerlifting gym. I think I told you the story about this. I actually heard about Rockwell because of Steffi Cohen.
Oh yeah. You know what? I was actually just kind of talking to Katie about that the other day because once we figured out we were actually doing this
Mhm.
weekend, I was telling Katie what some of my points that I wanted to cover
Yeah,
when we were doing this
yeah.
podcast were. And she had asked me, like, well, how do you think Becca got into all of this? And I said to her, I'm pretty sure that Becca told me that it was Steffi Cohen that sort of originally, got her attention and
Yeah.
kind of got you excited about it. So tell me a little bit about that. I mean, everyone knows who Steffi is.
Yes.
But like, what was it about her or her lifting particularly that, got you engaged enough where you wanted
Yeah.
to start participating?
Yeah. So I'd always been like doing some sort of lifting. I started getting into more just like finding other physical therapists on Instagram at the time. I think this was back when I was in PT school. And this is still when we were having conversations in PT school about like, is deadlifting heavy functional or is it just a waste of time? Is it just causing more issues for people? And there was just way more debate about it than still should be in the 2020s.
Yeah.
But so anyways, I came across Debbie Cohen, and at the time, I think she was finishing up PT school herself as well. So just the combination of her going to like, gosh, what is it Animal Cage or Animal?
Oh yeah, the animal cage at the Arnold.
Yeah, I think she had just done like a 500-pound deadlift at like 120 something pounds body weight.
Yeah.
And so seeing her being a physical therapy student and deadlifting heavy, I was like, oh, that's cool. There's something to that. So I started going down the rabbit hole, kind of like looking more into her stuff. She was doing a ton of content on Instagram and everything. And ended up coming across her like hybrid performance program. So I started doing the template at the time. And that's kind of my first intro to powerlifting.
Yeah.
Got pretty strong doing it, but looking back at what it had us doing, I was like, nowadays I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah.
But anyways, it worked. Got me strong.
Some pretty wild intensity, I would assume.
Yeah. So one of the programs, if I remember correctly, she literally had you doing at the end of the week, every single week, you were going up to a heavy daily max for a conventional deadlift, straight into a heavy sumo single.
Damn.
Every single week, which was cool from a new
Yeah.
perspective. I mean,
Yeah.
granted, looking back, I had never been coached on how to properly deadlift or anything like that.
Yeah,
So God, I don't want to see videos of how that was looking.
Yeah.
But I got really strong in it. At the end of the day, like I think it was just cool because it like just gave me permission to lift heavy. You know what I mean? So that's kind of where it all took off. But yeah, so she had posted at some point a video of her deadlifting gear.
Yeah.
And it was right around when I think I was actually doing a clinical rotation in Chicago at the time. Hadn't graduated PT school yet. Still wasn't quite like dedicated enough to like actually spend the money on a proper powerlifting gym.
Yeah.
But it was just always in the back of my head. I was like, I knew I was going to be moving to Chicago eventually. And sure enough, once I moved here, Rockwell was the first one I reached out to.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you did. I mean, it kind of sprungboard all of these other things that you or I or none of us could see happening. It was kind of rad how it just, fell into place. Obviously with a lot of hard work and struggles and, tough days, tough nights kind of thing.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I actually saw sort of her transition from being, just this really intense, strong, but also smaller lifter, into like a doctor of PT.
Yeah.
And that was pretty interesting to watch from the outside, because as a lifter, I had not really considered that side of lifting to be a part of lifting up until around that area. That was around, I mean, I'm not going to say that we weren't already doing like mobility protocols and warm-ups and stuff like that. But I feel like that was probably one of the first introductions for me, and it sounds like you too, and other people, to see that like crossroads of PT and powerlifting right in front of our faces. Like everyone was already paying attention to her anyways.
Exactly.
So that was kind of interesting to see. And then luckily for me, I actually kind of saw it sort of unfold with you, like in this gym too.
Yeah.
And didn't even really realize it at the time until like some time had passed, and I was like, all right, well, now Becca's in here. She's a legit power lifter. She's competing on a regular basis, and then lo and behold, you finish school and then start practicing physical therapy, which was pretty cool to see. So initially, you were practicing physical therapy at UIC, is that right? Or did I get that?
It's actually with Rush Physical Therapy.
Rush. Sorry. Okay, got it. All right.
That was my first job out of school.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was actually the company. So it was NovaCare before that.
Okay.
But then they transitioned to being Rush Physical Therapy. But for the most part, it was just, traditional mill clinic.
Yeah.
Working very much with just general population, just folks that, a lot of them were very sedentary. It was more so just like getting them active again.
Yeah.
Not a ton of athletes at that time. And it certainly wasn't the setting fit for an athlete. Like, to put into perspective,
I understand that, yeah.
Pretty sure the heaviest weight we had was a 30-pound kettlebell that I brought to the clinic.
Yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately, it was kind of a situation where just people were getting really underloaded. I think what really sparked me realizing that like that kind of setting was not the fit for me with where I wanted to go and just like best serve athletes and the population that I wanted to work with was like when I started to get a few people from the gym being referred to me there, where I was like, hey, like, I can show you like some of these basic like mobility drills, stability things, but like at the end of the day, like with powerlifters, like chances are those things aren't enough to actually challenge you enough to change you to be able to lift the hundreds of pounds that you're trying to do.
Makes
know what I
sense.
mean?
Yeah, definitely.
And it wasn't a setting where I could actually like check out like how are they squatting, how are they deadlifting, stuff like that. And at the time I just like wasn't knowledgeable enough on just programming and load management and just all of these kind of bigger heavy hitters. So that's where I kind of transitioned to my next role, kind of another clinic that was set up to be a little bit more meant for athletes for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
And that's kind of where we met.
Yeah. And, as I've told you before, I've done some physical therapy in the past, as you would imagine, from doing, powerlifting, from doing jiu-jitsu, Thai boxing. Like you don't do any of those things without having something pop up along the way. It's just impossible. So I've been to, 3 or 4 other PTs, and because of that, 3 or 4 other PT clinics, and experience, probably 1 or 2 that was probably very like rushed from what it sounds like. And then I experienced one that was probably the closest to the clinic where you and I first started working together, but not quite, because there wasn't a barbell there.
Yeah.
There wasn't a rack there. There wasn't a bench. Very limited equipment. So it was all body weight, exercises or physio bands, which are, they're fine. But especially for myself, and I think probably most of the general public too, if you're actively working out, kind of limited if you only have that. So when I first started working with the other clinic, I was really excited to see some of the things that I have in my gym, or I'm sure other people come from other gyms. You like to see those similarities there. We're like, okay, well, I'm not just doing PT because I'm hurting when I sit at my desk at work, which, those people need help too, and that's great. But, we're looking at, okay, we're doing this movement and it bothers me.
Yes.
And then that bothers me in daily life.
Yes.
If I'm doing this often enough under pain and discomfort. So I thought that was a pretty cool transition to see. And I was really excited to see all those things in there.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that really made me continue to come in there. Not only just because of the equipment alone, obviously, and shared services, but just seeing you comfortable implementing PT with the exercises that I am actively doing. Or on the flip side of that, coming in from jiu-jitsu, one time I came off of a tournament and I feel like my shoulder and arm was like dislocated off of my torso from, whatever happened. And seeing you be comfortable taking on those challenges without a lot of previous experience in that category and being totally comfortable with it. And then just us figuring it out together, you know what I mean? Like, it's an open forum with you. I feel like it's not extremely rigid.
Yes.
you know.
Because that's what it is. I mean, at the end of the day, like, no matter what sport it is people are getting back to, like, obviously, yes, barbell athletes, powerlifting, that's my bread and butter. I love it. I'm in it. I understand it.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool. But like, what that's taught me is just like getting that to carry over in other sports, though. Like, I've worked with you, jujitsu athlete. I've worked with somebody who's in acrobatics who I don't know a thing about it.
Yeah.
But I just need
Yeah.
to see what it is that they need to do. You know, I pay attention to like, what are the demands? It's like, what
Yeah.
are the positions that they need to get into that they're struggling with? What are the loads? What are the velocities they're moving through? You know, just the planes of motion. Like, you can take any movement and just do a needs analysis.
Yeah.
And as long as you care enough and you look into it enough, like, you can figure out what that person is missing and help them bridge the gap a little bit better.
Yeah, the demands word is what really caught my attention. You know, and it's not that these problems are simple. In fact, they're actually really complex. But it simplifies it enough to where you can try to find a starting point.
100%.
And I think that's even something that, you know, us as trainers or other professionals in our sort of field, whatever you want to call it, can kind of use as a baseline, you know, instead of trying to make it this calculus equation, this unknown mystery thing that only this person knows how to figure out the answer. It's like it's very involving the client or the patient. And I think that's why we all enjoy working with you. I mean, at this point, like a large majority of our gym works with you. And I think somewhere along the line, we realized that was kind of happening. And it was funny because you and I never really sat down and talked about it in the sense of being like, hey, at some point, why don't you work at Rockwell?
Right.
We'd love to have you there. It was just this natural progression.
Just eventually just made sense.
Yeah. And it was funny because, you know, I'm a pretty like laid back guy, you know, for the most part. And there was many days where I was walking into the clinic and then also leaving the clinic, and I would be like, hey, see ya, hi, bye. And it was like, you know, a fellow trainer of mine, or it was a client of mine, or a lifter that I lived next to in the gym. And I was like, man, all of us are going here. That's pretty cool. I was like, good for her. And then after a while, I was like, well, why don't we just do it here? Like in the back of my head. But I was like, I don't want to force that. So I was like, why don't we just see if that comes up eventually? And then you were like, hey, Lawrence. So
it was so perfect.
It was kind of rad that it unfolded that way. And a lot of the things with this gym do kind of work that way. Like a lot of things aren't forced. It just sort of happens out of necessity. Like the Jiu-Jitsu Academy, Thai Boxing Academy. I never sat down when this whole thing started and was like, hey, one of these days, let's have an academy in the gym. We're just kind of doing the build out, you know, and started gauging interest. And, you know, Ed, I was already training with him out the burbs, and him and I were already talking about doing something, realized we had a little bit of extra space. Yeah. And so like, yeah, it would be kind of cool to have it here. And that's kind of how we did it with, you know, your PT operation, which I feel like it's kind of fun to do it in that way. It's just this organic sort of natural thing. And it just starts off much easier. And I feel like it's easier to grow it that way.
It just works so much better because you have, like you said, you haven't had to force it. You haven't had to make things happen. It's like, you know, you had the space open in the lobby of the jiu-jitsu area that's open during the day. I had clientele that I'm seeing a bunch of people from Rockwell, and I wanted to get out on my own and start doing my own cash-based practice. So it just made sense.
Yeah. And you know, a huge compliment to you too, because this whole gym, this whole thing started very humble beginnings, right? And we still are really, really humble. Like we don't say a lot. We just kind of do our work, let it speak for our, you know, for ourselves. And, you know, like the way you started your operation here, you were like, hey, do we have a little bit of space to work with? I'm going to get in there and I'm going to go hard, you know, and you don't have this giant office, you know, like eventually we'll get there someday.
Sure.
But the fact of the matter is that's not there. You're more worried about what you can do for the gym. So you have a little window of opportunity to start creating something and build off of there. And I just feel like that's such a good fit for us. And honestly, it's a huge reason why I respect you so much. And whether people realize it here or not, I think that's why they have an immense amount of respect for you, is because you're willing to take your little hole in the wall and start putting brick by brick up into something that's very tangible.
Absolutely.
And that's just been on my mind for a while now. So I had to kind of get that off my chest.
Hell yeah.
But I was wondering, what's your origin story with working out, with lifting weights and getting into taking care of yourself? Because we kind of talked about how you got into powerlifting. Yeah. But what was the very, very beginning of that? What made you step foot into the gym? What made you continuing to go to the gym week out, week in?
Absolutely. So my first experience with starting to work with a personal trainer and just generally getting into a program was actually freshman year of high school. I knew I wanted to play a sport in college, but at the time I was still playing softball and basketball. was much naturally better at softball. Basketball, I had to work a hell of a lot harder for. But anyways, at the time, my dad was just to a point where he's like, you know what, like, we just got to pick something and we got to work really hard for it. Because at the end of the day, we know we just got to get the reps in and doing two, you know, it's absolutely possible to do two sports.
Dual
but
sports.
at the end of the day, like, I wanted to focus on one. So the compromise was I was going to give up basketball, was going to focus on softball, and then my dad was going to hire me my first personal trainer to start working
That's
out.
awesome.
So both my sister and I started doing it. And I remember workout number 1. I'm pretty sure I passed out a little bit in the backseat of the car when my dad was driving us back home because I was so out of shape. But it was just such a good reminder of like, Kayla, you have a hell of a lot of work to do. And I don't know if you remember how skinny I was when I first started back at Rockwell in like 2021. I was tiny.
Yeah.
Like half the size of that back in high school.
I don't think a lot of us realize that, you know, but if you really think back, you were very much a different human being walking around.
100%.
We all know you sort of as this now, you know, and I'm like, well, I don't know. Becca's just born like that. You know what I mean? She's like,
nope. I've had to work very, very
really good genetics. You know, she eats healthy.
I wish. But anyways, so I started actually training with a trainer through high school. That was still pretty minimal, nothing crazy. But then came softball. I started playing softball in college. We had, you know, obviously just classic team workouts. Biggest thing that like stood out to me about that. So I remember one of our coaches, our strength and conditioning coach, I don't remember what year it was in high school, but he had just gotten his CrossFit level 1 certification.
Oh shit.
So this is kind of sparking a little bit of the PT background too. Word. So you can imagine where this is going, but just got his CrossFit level 1 certification. None of us, I think maybe one of the girls on the tape had experience with CrossFit. Another one maybe with some Olympic weightlifting, but we were his guinea pigs.
That's kind of why I said, oh shit, because
we were his guinea pigs. Yeah. So it would be, imagine a team of like 20 to 30 girls.
Yeah.
One coach. He would start teaching us how to snatch or teach us how to do like barbell cleans or something like that within like 15 minutes. Cannot pay attention to every single girl on the team by any means during that time.
Training one person correctly.
Yeah, especially Olympic lifts.
That's
much less a team that has never done it. But the real problem was we would learn it for 15 minutes and then we'd go straight into a Metcon involving that, moving weight overhead as fast as we possibly could. Naturally, as you can expect, that was a season that like a solid chunk of the team was injured. Yeah. So that was a big spark in like just general interest of like load management and programming of like, hey, how can we do this a little bit better?
At that point, it's trying to get to the season.
Yes,
period.
Exactly. Just make it through the season in one piece, you know?
Damn.
So that kind of sparked some interest back then, but that's kind of how I got into lifting. And I'm extremely competitive. If I love sports, I love physical activity. If I'm not good at something immediately, I become obsessed with it and I want to get really, really good at it.
That's a good trait.
Yes, it's great until it's not.
Yes,
but anyway, so it was one of those things where like I was one of the smallest girls on the team. Like I'm talking like we're barbell back squatting and I wish I had a video of it. I'm pretty sure like 95 pounds and I was like knees knocking on the way up sort of thing. Like just atrocious. And I knew it, but I was just there to get the work in.
For sure, yeah.
Anyways, wrap up softball. It ended up being one of those things where like I just didn't want to become one of the ex-athletes, like just another statistic of like someone that like has been a part of a team for their entire life, has been told by a coach what exactly to do for their entire life, for both practice, for training, all of this stuff. And then they leave college and they stop playing ball. And now that they don't have coach to hold their hand, they just fall off. You know, they become super sedentary. They never look at a weight again. They end up having all of these issues, and I didn't want that. So that's kind of when I got into lifting a little bit more, not even necessarily powerlifting a little bit more. I just started
just training.
Yeah, just training for the sake of getting strong and learning more, and that's kind of what sparked all of that.
I wonder what the percentage would be. Like, what would your guess be of athletes that sort of fall into that little category there when they get out of? I mean, I know it's hard to say exactly, but I feel like it's high, right?
It's if I had to guess, it's got to be around 75%. Yeah. I mean, even if it's not like they go completely sedentary and never do anything, it's at the very least, they end up just clueless and are in this like constant cycle of like, oh, let me go to the gym. And they do way too much too soon, injure themselves or make themselves so sore that they like go on a month hiatus before they come back and just rinse and repeat, you know?
Yeah. I was sort of thinking about, you know, you initially walking in here to work out. what was your impression the first day that you came here, and how did your impression change over, say, like the next couple of months or
Ooh,
the first year of being here? Because they're vastly different for everyone.
yeah,
Even my impression of this place has changed dramatically
sure.
from the first day or like the first time this location opened
Yeah,
to even now is different from last year. So I'm just curious about like your initial walking in, meeting certain personalities,
sure.
to like, being an integral
Yeah.
part of the gym, where you
Yeah.
become a regular.
Yeah. I was incredibly intimidated at first. Incredibly intimidated at first. Luckily, you paired me with a trainer that we vibed super well with each other.
That
I was paired
helps.
with Marie.
That helps.
So that helped for sure. Honestly, it was just one of those things where like you just walk in and you just see the sheer amount of specialty bars and the different types of racks
Yeah.
and even the different plates, iron plates, kilo plates, and you just, especially coming from a commercial gym, you're just like,
Yeah.
I don't want to break anything.
Yeah.
I don't know what that does. I don't know what that does. Even though at the time when I started, I was a physical therapist, like I was working, I
Yeah.
had a pretty good knowledge of like how to move and
I
stuff
thought
like
you were
that.
already up and rolling with that by
But
then.
even when we talked at that time,
Yeah.
like we were both like, hey, it's been a while since you've done heavyweights
Yeah.
and you just haven't worked in a powerlifting
Yeah.
gym before and don't know a lot of this stuff. Like, why don't you just work with a trainer and just get the hang of it?
Yeah.
Which was the best move ever. Like, I'm so thankful for it. I learned so much, got really, really strong those first
Yeah.
couple months. So
Definitely.
that was really cool. But I mean, as far as like transition, I would say it's not even my impression of the gym. It's just me comfort level in the gym. Like I started off so the type of like, I'm in there to go train by myself, put my headphones in, put my head down, not talk to anybody. I might like smile at somebody or anything. Like, I
Yeah.
don't even know that I talked to you much at that point, just because I was just
Yeah.
coming in to get my stuff done and get out of there, you know?
Yeah.
But over time, as I've gotten more comfortable and know what I'm doing, get to know everybody so much more. I mean, it's just like a family coming in here. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like you walk in, I hardly put my headphones in anymore at this time, at
Yeah.
this point. Like
Yeah.
it's just everybody's backgrounds are so interesting. They all work with different coaches. They've all got different feedback. So it's just cool
Yeah.
to be able to go in the gym and just do your lift and like just shoot the shit with people and just
Yeah.
kind of learn things from their background of how their lifting has gone. And
Definitely.
I don't know.
It's been very cool to see that, and it takes time, just like everything. But the thing that makes me really happy is that because you've spent so much time here and now you work in this building, and I feel like you've really taken like a big ownership
Yeah.
of the gym. Like you have a certain place here, and sort of we need you as much as you need us. And I'm not even talking about like work wise. I'm just saying like as a lifter in the gym,
Yes.
as a friend that's over there across the way doing their thing. And it makes me really happy to see someone that originally came here just to kind of get rolling in powerlifting, try to figure it out or whatever, get consistent with it, is just like a pillar,
Yes.
for the gym. So that's been really awesome to see. It was very interesting to hear you mention like your initial impression of the gym was this thing, which isn't a huge surprise to hear. I think a lot of people, that's their initial like sticker shock thing, and then they realize they're like, well, these people are just a bunch of nerds in here. Like
Yes.
they're all autistic and they're nerds, and like, and
All they care about is the weight on the bar.
yeah,
And just
a bunch of issues in here, but it was kind of interesting to mention that you really just kind of like were figuring out things for yourself
Yeah.
eventually, which I think is kind of rad because I feel like if you can sort of internalize what you need to do
Mhm.
rather than like what the space around you is. You know what I mean? People get caught up in that stuff way too much.
Absolutely.
But yeah, and then so I want to talk a little bit about Iron Mind.
Yeah.
Sort of I know that you do help a lot of athletes, you do help a lot of power lifters, obviously being one yourself, but you also help a lot of generalized people too that aren't necessarily trying to, max out their back squat or aren't doing martial arts or, aren't, doing some obscure,
Yes.
hobby. So how do you feel like it blends everything together, and what was initially your sort of like mantra for it?
Yeah.
Or like I kind of like loosely use the word passion project because that's thrown around a lot these days.
Sure.
But that's usually, in my opinion, how a good business starts, is off of an idea or a necessity that we feel like we need to sort of fill the void with that. All right, there's obviously a lot of PT going on in the city of Chicago.
Yes.
You drive down every street and you're going to see 3 or 4 PT clinics. They're everywhere. But what was the thing initially that made you want to start your own practice that was differing from the other practices? We touched on it a little bit earlier.
Sure.
But yeah, I just was curious to see what made you want to sort of take the lead, because that's a tough thing to do, especially when there's 100 places around us. But the last thing I'll say before I let you answer that is that, like, a lot of people always talk about, like, oh, the market's saturated, right? They say that about personal training, they say it about gyms, I'm sure they say it about PT clinics.
Yeah.
But the market's really not saturated. If you're really committed to what you're doing and you're really into it and you want to change things, the market's kind of like yours for the taking. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, yeah. What made you want to, like, get that up and rolling?
Yeah. So there's been kind of two things. With Iron Mind, I started it as strictly a cash-based practice. So I don't accept insurance, which I could do an entire podcast complaining about our healthcare system and insurance. 2. Dude, we could do like a 5-part.
After having my appendix out this summer, now I understand why people are so pissed about healthcare. I've never been against it, but now I'm like, you know what? I'm fucking mad too. Like, I'm really mad.
Yes. So the most frustrating thing, even going back to me working in a little bit more of the mill setting, was, how it works. And a lot of people don't understand this. They have, just generally speaking, people don't understand.
You said the mill? The mill?
The mill.
Okay,
yeah.
like just
traditional mill.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, what we're talking about with insurance-based practices, especially ones that take every plan known to man, how they end up having to make money is they end up having to schedule people every single half hour, usually doubling people first thing in the morning, first thing before lunch, first thing after lunch, first thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And these companies, in a lot of cases, just care about their productivity. They just care about the numbers. They don't really care so much about, like, how these people are being treated. Is it best practices, stuff like that.
Definitely.
But then another issue with the insurance companies is that in a lot of cases, people don't realize, like, even though they may have, say, 100 visits per year, according to their plan.
Yeah.
Their insurance will make the physical therapy companies jump through loops to get handfuls of those sessions approved for to actually use. So even though the person is paying their insurance company to be able to use it for PT sessions, physical therapy still has to do a million things to prove why they need it.
I've experienced that firsthand myself.
Yes.
Where I've talked to someone, like, at the desk or on the phone, and I've realized that they couldn't give me a straightforward answer.
Yep.
And it wasn't like they were just deciding to mess with me for no reason. It's because they had to deal with their boss. The boss has to deal with your insurance.
Exactly.
And it's a whole charade.
It's a whole thing. So the most frustrating was when we would have, like, a post-op client who really needs a lot of PT, and take, for example, somebody that just had ACL surgery. Like, they need a solid year of physical therapy because they're athletes and they need to get back from, like, hardly being able to walk to be able to run, cut, jump.
Yep.
Just everything.
Yeah.
But insurance, in a lot of cases, will give them 20 visits arbitrarily and then just cut them off and say, hey, you can run in a straight line for like 10 minutes. You're good. Go back to sport. You're fine.
Yeah.
And then what happens? They end up re-tearing their ACL again. Rinse, repeat. The cycle just keeps going.
Then they get their money. So
the insurance companies get their money. Yep. So I was really frustrated with that. So that's always been a thing. So I knew I kind of wanted to go more of a cash-based route, just because especially not only that, but then a lot of people don't realize they end up spending nearly the same amount of money using their insurance as they do even without it. Because even though you might have a really good plan, come to find out you have like a $2,000 or $3,000 deductible that you're going to be paying that out of pocket before your insurance even thinks about covering anything else. Right? So being able to create my own company was just going to give me so much more freedom. No third party dictating what is appropriate for a person. No longer having to deal with insurance being like, we're only paying for issues once they arise and not paying for preventative care at all.
Yeah, which is super sad.
Yes, it's unfortunate, and that's
from like a quality of life standpoint, that's what bums me out the most, because I understand, I guess, if you're a business saying like, we don't want to spend a bunch of unnecessary money, right? If you take the emotional side of it, I get it. Yeah. But if you think about the quality of life standpoint, like how much time people are missing, especially they're repeating these injuries, and then the body, you have one body, like people always say, that's kind of a common saying, but we only have one body. So if you keep injuring the same joint like 3, 4, or 5 times, it's kind of exaggerated, but it does happen. That's how you end up having a knee replacement, or that's how you end up stopping your activity level, which makes you
100%.
sedentary, which obviously there's all these other morbid things that come from that,
Yep.
but
And I don't know if like insurance companies don't realize it, but like once you get people less in or less active because all of a sudden they're not doing the things they enjoy anymore,
yeah,
they're going to have that much more money to spend when that person's in their 50s, 60s, because now they've got all these metabolic syndromes, they've got hypertension, they're,
yeah,
lots and lots of issues that come from that. That's
Yeah.
just making our healthcare costs that much more. Anyways, again, can vent about that for days.
100%.
But I think the biggest issue that I was seeing with most like physical therapy clinics is just none of them appropriately bridge the gap from rehab to performance.
Yeah.
People do clamshells for days, bird dogs, dead bugs. But like at the end of the day, if somebody wants to lift hundreds of pounds, like that's not enough to challenge that person, be able to get them to do what they want to do. So at least with Iron Mind, my goal was to be able to like, be in a gym where, this person is having issues with squatting, they're having issues with deadlifting. Instead of them going to a PT who doesn't understand anything about lifting, whose cop-out is going to be, don't do that.
Yeah.
Stop lifting, stop deadlifting, stop squatting.
Yep.
Even if it's just like, stop doing that for 6 weeks and then try again. Like, we all know how that goes. If you decondition yourself from squatting and deadlifting for 6 weeks and then you try and get back into it, like.
I've even seen it firsthand from running the gym. I've seen PTs tell people to stop working out in the capacity they are, which that's what they know right now. And most people, I mean, even you and I as coaches, it is not easy to be on a certain pathway. And when something happens, you have to shift gears to an entirely different pathway with your athlete or your person to keep them moving. It's not easy. It's challenging. I will sit down for an hour on a computer just staring at the screen and figure out how to like sort of deviate and keep on going.
Exactly.
So your average Joe is probably not going to be able to do that on their own by just randomly being like, all right, how am I going to modify all this stuff? And then the other issue is that the person tells them they can't work out. And so I've seen people come in and say, hey, I had this issue going on, whatever's going on in my body, my PT told me I need to take a break. So I'm going to take a break and then I'll come back later. And then they never come back. And these days and age, you're on social media. So you see what people are doing. And you see how this unfolds later. And I don't have to get into the details of it, but these people aren't looking great. They're not working out before they're posting all these training logs. You don't see it anymore, And so I think that route is very bad because most of the time, unless you're a special person, you're not going to just take 6 weeks off and then start busting ass.
Exactly.
Like next quarter. It just doesn't happen.
100%. So like my biggest goal with Iron Mind and like what I spend most of my time during, especially the first session with a new client, is helping them to find entry points for whatever the hell it is they're trying to get back to.
Yeah.
Like if they're having issues with deadlifting, we're going to go out to the gym and we're going to deadlift. Yeah. If it doesn't feel great off the floor, we're going to try reducing range of motion. We're going to play with speed. We're going to play with load on the bar. We're going to play with stances. Yeah. There's so many, and this is where the disconnect is. There's so many aspects of a lift that we can intervene on to make it doable for that person and to keep the bar in their hands that it goes way beyond like physical benefits. Like, don't get me wrong. We want to keep work capacity up. We want to keep strength up the best we can. But like the absolute most detrimental part of telling somebody to stop doing something is that they become terrified of it, whether they realize it or not. All of a sudden, they're just going to expect, say they take 6 weeks off and they go and try to deadlift. They're expecting that it's going to hurt because the last time they tried this, it did.
Psychological.
Exactly. So you need to spend more of your time helping them to have like a positive experience with the lift. Even if it doesn't look anything like what they would actually do in competition, that's fine. It's still beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. And the one thing I was thinking about when you were explaining all of that is that, being a part of sort of powerlifting culture for a really long time, I mean, a lot of people are just very stubborn. So like, one of we might lose our arm or something like that, and we're going to come in the next day and start doing 1-arm dumbbell presses or something. But you've seen a lot of these powerlifters over the years go through these horrible injuries, like, potentially like career ending / blah, blah, blah. That would usually be the time where people are like, all right, I'm done. Right. But I've seen my friends do it. I've seen a guy that coached me do it. I've done it myself. You've seen me do it, and I've always thought that was really cool to be able to just not allow something to take you out.
Yeah.
And, in powerlifting, depending on if you're in a good gym or not, you'll see people doing like, all right, I'm benching to a 3 board right now because that's the only thing I can do. But I'm benching.
But it's something.
And I'm happy to be benching. I really wish it wasn't this high, off my chest. But I'm still training my triceps, my chest, my shoulders functioning the best it can right now. And then eventually, whether it's 3 months or 6 months down the road or a year, you're like, man, I can't believe that person's benching and they're doing full range of motion. That's unbelievable, because it
Mhm.
kind of is unbelievable that you have a horrible injury and then continue to lift through it and then overcome it later. So it makes me really happy to see you do it in a business sense,
Yeah.
where people, they don't have to rely on themselves to have that special gift internally to
Exactly.
be like, well, I'm hurt. I'm going to go right out there and start modifying things and see what fits. They can actually go see you, find out what's really going on. And then you
100%.
can give them a sort of a scientific approach that is regulated.
Yes. Yes.
You know, like, you know, because we've all seen people modify stuff that's like, hey, dude, that's still like 350 pounds. Like,
Yeah.
holy shit, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to see people be able to rely on you for that and kind of
Yeah.
have some guidance, you know, and
Absolutely.
you're sort of doing the same thing that we've been doing for a long time, but in a much better setting and a much safer
Sure.
sort of, you know, some much needed oversight. So it's
Sure.
been really cool to see that. And so recently, right after you started the clinic here for Iron Mind, you also started working with TJ
Yeah.
on Ignition.
Yeah.
So explain the dynamic to me of how Ignition works.
Yeah.
And then I'd also like to talk briefly about your personal coaching with TJ,
Yeah.
because you've been working with him for quite a
Yeah.
while now.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, explain the dynamics of Ignition and just kind of how that's operating, how you guys are doing it.
Yeah. So Ignition Powerlifting is kind of a brand, I guess you could say, that we created. That's it's all remote coaching. Basically TJ and I are both, you know, we work under the function as powerlifting coaches. So I do some rehab programming and I could chat about that a little bit more, but for the most part, I'm actually doing just more performance coaching, which is a newer thing for me. With my previous gig, I did some remote programming that looked a lot like just training, just helping to bridge the gap a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things that, like, if somebody ever asked me what the biggest regret of my career was, it would have been not becoming a trainer so much sooner. Like, most of my continuing education courses that I've had to take for physical therapy stuff, I've geared more towards the training side of things,
see
just
that.
because learning how to coach people through movement. And I'm not saying like getting them to squat in the most perfect way or this or that, but like just learning different movement options for stuff and being able to tie together like the whole picture is just something that I've taken away so much from the programming side of things. So that's been really fun. And just, you know, physical therapists are known for getting burnt out pretty quickly in the field, which again, another, discussion that we could do a whole podcast about. But I feel like the performance side of things has just helped me so much because, you know, working with people in pain all the time gets daunting for sure, especially
for sure.
understanding being a lifter myself,
Definitely.
having gone through injuries myself. Like, we all let lifting and the number on the bar probably affect our mental health a little bit more than what we should.
That's also a second podcast.
Yes.
We already have that whole outline laid up.
Exactly. So like, I get it. And like, there are definitely times where I let how other people's, you know, injuries are affecting them both physically, mentally, affect me a little bit too much. So the performance side of things, where we can just like put our heads down, get to work, make them work hard, just put me on the bar and not really be tied down by injuries, has been amazing for my mental health.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. I train a lot of people. You mentioned that a while ago. You're like, man, I can't believe how many people you're working with on a regular basis or a daily basis. Even if I have 1 or 2 people a week that have an injury, right? Whether it happened while we were training or whether it's someone that I took on because they want to continue working out again, but they don't want to do it in a scary, risky way, they'll hire me to help me manage sort of the programming and the movements so that they can get back to normal. But, you know, I'm telling them, hey, like, we're not hitting this weight until your pain day to day is below a 5, you know, or whatever.
Yes.
But even having those people a couple times a week is very tough. It's very challenging to be doing, you know, 3 sessions where you're just blasting, you're just working on the program, you're just hammering, you know, someone's grunting, you know, we're just getting after it and, you know, sort of working on being tough and getting through the lift and through the workout. But then you have a sort of rehab,
Mhm.
hour, where there's something going on, it's probably going to be kind of a bothersome, aggravated hour.
Yep.
You have to keep the person in good spirits. You have to keep
Trying to keep them
yourself in good
positive.
spirits.
Yes.
You
Yes.
have
It's
to
exhausting.
make yourself and also the person that you're working with believe that it's working, because if neither of you are
100%.
believing it's working, it could be a perfect plan
Mhm.
and you're probably not going to succeed.
Yes.
So there's a lot of like weight load that goes on your shoulders that you don't realize, and
Yes.
then, when you get back into your normal hour, like, someone on the performance side, you're like, oh man, this is like, I'm in a good mood, like everything's.
Yeah.
So I can see dealing with that like all day, every day,
Yes.
and it could be pretty taxing. So I'm sure it's a nice little like shift of gears for you.
Exactly. And it's really fun. I'm finally like, I've got my first client that's actually in meet prep. So first time coaching somebody all the
Oh,
way
yeah.
through actual preparation, like into a meet
Yeah.
and everything like that.
Definitely.
So really excited about
It's
that.
probably awesome to be on the other side of that a little
Yes.
bit, where you're like, okay, we're gearing you up for this date.
Yeah.
You're gonna lift. I'm in the back making sure this is all right. I'm not the person doing it. I don't have
Exactly.
that kind of stress that
Yes.
day.
100%.
But yeah, what has it been like working with TJ from you being coach standpoint?
Yeah.
Because you worked with him for a while, and I've seen a lot of major changes happen since you've worked with him.
Yes.
And making that switch. So what are your thoughts on training with him and
Yeah.
his style and approach?
For sure. For sure. So I think I've been working with him for 1.5 to 2 years now.
Yeah.
I think I would have to double check that,
Sounds about
but
right.
biggest thing when I started working with him, my squat was abysmal. Like, I'm pretty sure my comp squat at the time was like 226 pounds and my deadlift was 350 pounds. So our goal was to get my squat within 100 pounds of my deadlift.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, that's a good.
And we did. We very, very well surpassed that. I mean,
yeah.
he really, really helped me to get a hell of a lot stronger with my squat
Yeah.
and my bench press. But I think the biggest thing that stands out for me with him is like he just does such a good job of like not being afraid to push people, like really actually give them heavy
Yeah.
loads. Like I think I was deadlifting heavy more than I had within 2 months. And more than I had within a year of working with the previous coach. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
So I think again, it was one of those things. It was like the permission to lift heavy. But then what I really like about his coaching is that take any lift, no matter what it is, bench press, deadlift, he's going to have you doing multiple stances or multiple grips for no matter what the lift is.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, not only does that give you movement options, you get really strong at both conventional and sumo. If one of them starts to be painful, you just work on the other one and you're fine. You're competent in that enough. And as long as it's pain-free, cool. It lets you keep training, right?
Yep.
But the other thing is just making sure he just makes sure you're open to letting like just technique changes emerge over time, if that makes sense. So like, let's take my bench press, for example.
Sure.
I got pretty long arms.
Yep.
Not exactly the most muscular arms. You wouldn't look at me and be like, you're a really good bench presser by any means. But I was going with a pretty wide grip for the longest time in an attempt, as most females
Sort
do
of
that don't have a
offset.
ton of muscle.
Yeah.
Minimize the range of motion the best we can, just maximize leverages.
Yeah.
We did a block this past prep where we pushed both my typical comp grip, which was a relative lighter grip, and we just pushed the hell out of close grip. Like this was my first time pushing close grip for like threes, twos, singles.
Yeah.
And all of the sudden, my close grip surpassed my
It's pretty astonishing,
grip.
right?
It's one of those things where it's like, and it's just such a good reminder for me as a coach, like make people try all of these things. Like don't let them be married to one grip or one thing, because like even if something works for you now, injury might dictate a different way later.
Yep.
Or you just naturally might have put on more muscle. You might have new leverages that like before you know it, a different stance is necessary.
Yep.
I think that's one of those things, you've already alluded to it. Powerlifters tend to be stubborn.
Yep.
We see one way works for us. We had our PR on that way and we're hell-bent on keeping that technique.
Yeah, you can never close grip.
Exactly.
How are you going to know what you can do for close grip?
Exactly.
And even if you're not great at it, you're still using your arms in a way that you regularly don't. So your body has to adapt. And then, so it's just kind of silly to try to never explore those other options.
100%.
I'll never do a narrow stance squat. Okay, well, why not? Like,
Exactly.
It doesn't mean you have to do that all the time, but what's stopping you from doing 5 minutes on narrow stance squat when you're done deadlifting for a little bit? It's not a big deal,
Exactly. So I think that's one of the things that I learned both as a lifter myself, that like just to be so much more open to like variations or just all of these different methods, because you never know when something all of a sudden is going to become your new comp standard, you know, and just well surpass everything else.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure he's been great to work with too, from a standpoint of just having a coach that is, I mean, this is TJ's whole life.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say that, you know, and that's probably true, but it is his whole life by more than any other person I know, you know, in every sense of the word. Every time I see TJ not training a client or not lifting himself, he's texting someone back for video review stuff, you know, like he's, you know, I mean, we all do it. I'm sure TJ's on Instagram farting around sometimes, but like the majority of the time that guy's on his phone as he's talking to a client.
Yep.
And it's the morning, it's the middle of the day.
Exactly.
He's even told me at night, like, you know, I was up doing programming last night until 11. That's a pretty regular thing for him, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, when you watch him train, he's you know, he's still human. Like he'll complain about things here and there, but he's happy to be doing it. I'll take it a step further and say that he's happy to be there suffering.
Yes.
You know?
100%. I think some of the most successful powerlifters are the ones that just like, obviously are just super, we're all numbers oriented. Like at the end of the day, all we care about is the weight on the bar going up.
Yeah.
But we also equally love the suffering and the process to get there. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
It's one of those things like before he wrote my block for my first block post meet for my meet in July. It was literally a text being like, how much do you want to suffer this block? I just immediately, I don't even remember. I probably sent some sort of GIF, but something along the lines of like, just bring it on.
Yeah.
Like, give me your worst. Yeah. We're equally psychotic as far as that goes. But I think that's why we work so well together as coaches. Yeah. Him being my coach and just us coaching together.
Yeah. So. You mentioned the competitiveness thing earlier. And so I can see TJ like sort of, you know, it's a real question for him, but he's sort of raising the stake to be like, all right, I'm going to see what her reaction is. Yep. So I can gauge like what we're going to be able to do with this block here. And then the fact that you're like, bring it on, you know, that's probably not what most people would guess that you would say back to your coach. Like I know if I sent that to like 10 people right now that I do programming for, that probably wouldn't be the response.
Sure.
Like it would be a bunch of people being like, I think I'm going to be on vacation for a little while, or I don't think I'll be able to get to the gym. Yes. Work's getting crazy, you know?
Yes, exactly.
But no, and so real quick before we wrap this up, we mentioned the clinic a bunch of times. Yep. So what are people's options as far as working with you? Like, you know, can they do one-offs? You mentioned, you know, that like you can do an hour or less. Like what are their options as far as working with you? Just so that everyone knows kind of what their choices are. And it's also for obviously people not just in Rockwell. Yes. It's like the general public.
Absolutely. So I've got kind of three main options. So I've got my in-person physical therapy, and that can be regular physical therapy where we do a weekly thing, or it can even be, and actually what I do more frequently is, especially with any people that are referred to me from their coaches or their trainers, is we usually do like a one-time session. It's strictly like assessment based. We kind of do the full thing where we do a lot of the range of motion, strength, a lot of the nitty gritty stuff. Yeah. But then it's also checking their compound lifts that they're having issues with. Yeah. I love to collaborate with coaches because ultimately my biggest thing is that I don't think rehab and training should be these things that are separated into their own silos. Like if we really want to make a difference with somebody and keep them in the gym, we have to make sure they're meshing well. Yep. So what I usually do is I work with coaches, collab with them, obviously with the client's permission, but just to give recommendations as far as, is there any daily rehab I want them doing? Is there any specific warm up I recommend? Are there any like program modifications or stance changes, etc., just to make sure we're on the same page? Yep. And it just turns their already training into their rehab. They don't have to go and do 2 times or 3 times a week PT elsewhere. Yep. So that's one option. I also do recovery services. So that could look like, you know, cupping, Graston, dry needling, massage, stretching, whatever that is, just things to help you generally feel good, give you a mobility routine, stuff like that. Yep. And then I'm also starting to do personal training as well. So I'm starting to take on some clients here at Rockwell. Again, remote coaching through Ignition, powerlifting, but then also if you already have a coach that you're working with and you really just want somebody to kind of take the reins for your rehab for, you know, a month or 2, something like that, I have a rehab programming as well with the ultimate intent of getting you back to that coach.
Yeah, and I like the idea of sort of integrating the coaching with PT. Yes. You know, even for other coaches that are out there working with someone, I think that we should be a lot more comfortable doing that because it's such a learning opportunity for the coach as well. And then also for
Absolutely.
you as a PT, like you're going to
Yes.
constantly figure out more and more by doing that.
Yep.
And even in the beginning when I knew zero, I still told people I was working with, I said, hey, if you want, your doctor to email me
Mhm.
and just give me some general standard advice, please do.
Absolutely.
If you want your chiro to reach out to me or your PT or anyone that anyone that's
Exactly.
looking after you, if you want to communicate with me, the door is open. And it
Absolutely.
always made me a little bit nervous to do that
Sure.
because, I'm not in their particular position, but I'm still working with this person and I'm responsible for the health of their body to a degree and their overall well-being. And so I was always interested in being like, yeah, let's just like chit chat a little bit.
Yes.
And worst case scenario, we don't really get to talk about anything and nothing gets figured out. But most of the time,
Yeah.
there's a lot of common ground that can
Exactly.
that can be kind of met there. And I think it's also good for the other people on the other side of that, like, professionals that are working with people. It gives them a chance to be a little more
Yes.
hands-on instead of being like, well, you're in my office for like 30 minutes. Good luck.
Exactly.
Do whatever you're going to do out there. And then I'll figure out what's going on with you a couple months from now.
And it just gives a client that much more faith in, their coach and their practitioner. Like,
Yeah.
especially when if you refer out to somebody, them just being like, okay, like,
Definitely.
I know what's in my wheelhouse. I know what's not. But at the end of the day, like, all we care about is the client getting better and getting
Yeah,
stronger.
100%. Real quick before we go, I took some notes on the next podcast.
Yeah.
I think it'd be actually really cool to have TJ on with you.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we can kind of dive into is sort of like the mental health side
Yes.
of powerlifting. We can just kind of let that go wherever it's going to go.
Yes.
Just have
I
fun
love
with
that. I'm down.
it. And then, we'll also just talk about, potentially getting burnt out as a PT or even, as someone working in a gym in another capacity. And I think that would be kind of a cool podcast
I love it.
to like go off on. But thanks for doing this. It's awesome to actually have you on the podcast.
Absolutely.
And definitely gonna have to do it again. So
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
that's it, Shar.
You do that every time. You give me a look, and you're like,
Woohoo! Like, you're like, what now, Sean? You took the lead now.
You can take another and be like, that's all, folks.